Good evening. My name is Kathy Stout. I'm one of the librarians here at the Phoenixville Library, and the library is very pleased this evening to present Ann Atkins, who is a local author and speaker. She's led a very interesting life, and this evening she's going to share with us Eleanor Roosevelt's life of soul-searching and self-discovery, which just happens to be the title of one of the books in the Flash History series that she has written.
I have no idea.
So Ann's journey to this point has included being a college instructor. We'll try this. Ann's journey has included being a college instructor, a counselor, and the director of a family support center, while she has lived in Korea, England, and Germany. Her master's degree from Boston University also encompassed studies at the University of Cambridge. She likes to spend her free time with her family, hiking, reading, and of course, history. So please welcome Ann Atkins.
All right, I want to thank you so much for having me here. I love libraries. I don't know about any of you, but I'm sure we've all got stories of when we were a little kid and we'd go to the library and I'm sitting there reading Nancy Drew. Just a couple other small details before we really get started. I have some books with me if any of you would like. They're $10 each. If you don't have money with you, that happens all the time. I've just got some envelopes up here with my name and address on, so grab a book, grab an envelope, and just mail me a check for $10. My second book was on Gold of My Year, and that just came out this fall. And so if you would like a copy of that, I've also got that with me. And because so many people ask me, I'll answer the question right now, who's your next person? That's Marie Curie. So I know, awesome ladies. And I must say, when people say, are you always going to write about women? My answer is, well, when I run out of women, I'll start writing about men. A couple things. My background is as a counselor, and I would use historical people as examples to my clients as to why they too could overcome things and move on with their life. And Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, is just the finest example of that. And what we know about Eleanor, so many of us know, we know her quotes. One of her quotes being, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. And that's a very powerful quote. But if all you knew about Eleanor was that she was a first lady for 13 years, you would think, well, if I was a first lady, I could say something like that too. But if you understand where Eleanor came from, if you understand everything that she went through, what I call the arc of her journey, then you would know when she says, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent, she earned that quote. This was not just rhetoric for her. She earned it, she lived that. And so that's what I want to leave you with tonight. I mean, my heavens, we could talk for 4 nights about Eleanor, and trust me, it would not be boring. But what we're going to do tonight is just talk about her childhood and where she came from, and how she then became that woman that we know that could say a quote like that. So Eleanor was born in 1884. And the reason that's important is because society back then was really spelled with a capital S. It was that important. Her maiden name is Roosevelt. I always say when she married Franklin, she didn't have to change her stationery. and back then, how many of you have watched Downton Abbey? They would have been invited to Downton Abbey. That's who they were in society. all right? So Eleanor was born on October 11th, 1884, and on the very first day she's born, she makes two mistakes. One is she's born a girl, and that's a problem. The second mistake is she's homely. And now mind you, this isn't my opinion, or I'm sure many of your opinions, this is society's opinion, and it was certainly her mother's opinion that Eleanor is homely. And that's a real problem for the mother, Anna, because Anna is drop-dead gorgeous. She's beautiful. This woman is so beautiful that there's an artist from France that comes over just to paint her painting. That's pretty. And when Anna was in her coming out season, remember Society, New York, coming out season, her mother is voted Belle of the Ball. That means like best in Philly, only it's New York. And every one of Anna's sisters, that would be Eleanor's aunts, they are also voted Belle of the Ball, the year of their coming out. And the grandmother, so Eleanor's grandmother is voted Belle of the Ball, the year of her coming out. So some of you are already getting it. Hold that thought. Another small story about Eleanor's mom, then too, just to give you kind of a context, is Eleanor will be standing in the doorway of her house, and she's standing there chewing on her fingers, and her mother is holding tea in the living room there and has her friends, and she'll look over at Eleanor and go, "Oh, Granny, come in, come in." Granny, really? And that doesn't do anything for your self-esteem. And so you can see any kid chewing on their fingers. This is a nervous, insecure child. Her father is Elliot Roosevelt. Elliot is Teddy's brother, Teddy Roosevelt. How many of you saw the Ken Burns series? All right, yeah, it was fabulous. And of course, you've got Teddy Roosevelt there, man. He is like the Energizer Bunny. And if there's a problem, he's gonna solve it. And he goes on to, of course, be our president. Well, Elliot is nothing like that. We would say today about Elliot that he was trying to find himself. And the problem is he never does. He struggles with drugs, he struggles with alcohol, and he enjoys the company of fast women. Well, that's fine if you're not married, or at least not too problematic, but once he's married, that's a problem. And so over these next few years with Anna, his wife, they become totally estranged. And in fact, she doesn't even want to see him anymore. Where it also becomes more exasperated is his shenanigans have become public. Now, as you know, a lot of people can get away with a lot of stuff, but once it goes public, oh, now it's a problem. So Teddy, who is our president now, has seen where in the New York newspapers that Elliot's mistress is taking him to court because there's an illegitimate child. So now, of course, he is disowned from the family. And again, as I said, Anna has nothing to do with him. And Anna and the kids now are living up in Tivoli. If you've been to Hyde Park, it's right there on the Hudson. And there's a small village just north of Hyde Park called Tivoli. So that's where Grandma's got her mansion. Now, of course, she also has the obligatory mansion down in New York City, like all wealthy families do. And so that's where Anna and the two boys are staying. Eleanor has two brothers. When Eleanor is 8, one of the boys is very ill and he dies, just a childhood disease. And so Anna, the mother, also becomes very ill. And in the midst of this, she has diphtheria and they know she's going to die. So she says to Eleanor, "Eleanor, I want you to always watch over your brother, Paul." Eleanor is an 8-year-old. What are you doing telling an 8-year-old and putting that responsibility on her shoulders? But she does. The mother does. The mother does die. And so there is Eleanor and Hall now. And as an aside, just quickly, about Hall, Eleanor does live up to that promise. And what's interesting to me is you know, in the Ken Burns series, and you see all these magnificent things that Eleanor does do, we don't hear about all of this background stuff that was also going on. You know, you didn't know, if you watched that series, that in the midst of all of that, she's busy going to a hospital taking care of Hall still. She will always be watching over Hall. Hall is a tall, good-looking man, extremely intelligent, but he also struggles with alcohol. In fact, he dies of alcohol. You've got to drink a lot to kill yourself with alcohol. And so in the midst of always having him come home for weekends and holidays and all of that, now when he's in his 50s, he is dying of alcoholism, and she is with him in the hospital during those last final weeks. So those are the background things always of what was going on for Eleanor, and part of just her character. So anyway, this happens when Eleanor is 8. So now when Eleanor is 9, at one point she is able to go and visit her dad. He has visiting rights for the day, we would say. So they're down in New York City, and her dad has said, hey, I'm going to come by and pick you up. Let's take the dogs for a walk. And you can imagine Eleanor is like all happy because she gets to see her dad, because she's always had a good relationship with him, because he's always somehow used her to sidle his way back into the family back when he could come and visit. And she didn't know that this was ulterior motives of just to at least be close to somebody, because the mother was so upset with him. So anyway, they go out for a walk with the dogs. And again, you can imagine Eleanor is a 9-year-old, and in her mind, she's like, this is a great day. Well, they walk by a men's club that he belongs to, and he says to Eleanor, hold the dogs, I'll be right out. And it's 3 hours later that he is carried out. And it's the doorman that takes her home. So again, think of yourself, you're a 9-year-old, and you're standing there holding the dogs, just hoping, come on, Dad, come on out, come on, anytime now, come on. And it doesn't happen. Now, I don't say any of these stories to reflect poorly on the Roosevelt family. I think if any of us looked in any of our family closets, we would find some interesting stories. And so it's in that light that we say these things, just to recognize this is what Eleanor grew up with. And I don't say it that, oh, let's all feel sorry for Eleanor. No, there's been other people, and they've been through a lot worse, but tonight we're talking about Eleanor. So anyway, when Eleanor is 9, during that year, and it's not historically real clear of whether Elliot either jumps out or falls out of the apartment window in New York City where he's living with his mistress, but either way, it was suicide or stupidity, and he's now dead. So now they're orphans. Eleanor and Hall are orphans by the time they're 9. But they're still living with the grandmother up in Tivoli. And you'd think, I remember thinking, oh, they're with a grandmother, though, it's gotta be good, it's gonna be okay, it's a grandma. No, it's not. This grandmother is only in her 50s. She was a debutante herself, as I said. And her husband just had died a few years before this, and she really was not capable of running the house. And let alone she's got her own children that are in their 20s, and as we would say, all money and no brains. They're wealthy, they can get themselves into trouble, but of course have money to bail themselves out. So some of the stories about, say, the uncles who also struggled with being alcoholics is Eleanor will have a friend come over to visit. And so they're walking up the big long driveway like all those big houses have, and the uncles are upstairs shooting a gun out over the kids' heads. It's like, oh my God. And again, I mention this about alcohol because historically, I have read, you know, whether it's men or women historians, writing about Eleanor, and they're very disparaging about her sometimes, saying, well, you know, Eleanor was a bit of a curmudgeon, their words, not mine, and, you know, she was a stick in the mud, and she wouldn't let anybody drink. Well, you know, if I had this many alcoholics in my family, I'd get a little tight every time somebody started drinking too much, too. So, anyway, back to Hall and Eleanor living there at the grandmother's house, and at one point, Teddy, who's president, has said to the grandmother, listen, let's send Eleanor. Let's just, I think,
I personally think I can talk loud enough that y'all can hear me. My never had to say, Mom, you need a mic. It's okay. Yeah, as long as it's on. All right, so Teddy has said to the grandmother, listen, let's send Eleanor over to this school in England. It would be great for her. Teddy's sister Bambi had gone to this school, and some of the other aunts had gone to this school. It would be good for Eleanor to just get away. Grandmother says, oh no, I want to watch over Eleanor myself. Well, again, you would think that would be fine if we could now see, and I could tell you a bunch of stories of how this grandmother watched over Eleanor. There aren't any stories. But what there is money. And as we always say, follow the money. So what's happened is, you know, the two kids, they're orphans. Where's all that money going? They have an inheritance. They have a yearly income of $180,000 a year. That's in today's money. That's a lot. That was a lot back then. And the problem is things like this. This money isn't being used to raise the kids. This money is just grandma's using it to bail those boys out all the time and buy her daughters really great outfits. Because Eleanor, she'll go to a friend, and again, the friend has said to her, Eleanor, your dress is a little dirty. Why don't you go home and change? Eleanor says, well, I can't because I only have 2 dresses and my other dress is in the wash. Now, I'm sorry, but if you have an allowance of $180,000 a year, you should be able to have more than 2 dresses. And so, still, look at it this way, too. Here Eleanor is, she's 10, she's 11, she's 12, and nobody yet is like watching over her. Nobody is nurturing her. She isn't sitting on somebody's lap and they're saying to her, Eleanor, fix your hair, what's wrong with your socks, and did you finish your math homework? You know, there's nobody like paying attention. So over these next few years, this has been what's going on. Her education is really fairly sketchy. She has some tutors and all of that. Although, just as an aside, boy, does she become self-educated. She speaks fluent French, some German, and of course, you know, she always regretted that she didn't have a chance to go on to college. So anyway, at some point then to another story, and this is where there's a coming together of information. Because anything I tell you or anything I write is always historically accurate, all right? But for this point where there's kind of information, it's not real clear, I always make that clear so that you know. Another story, some friends are visiting Eleanor, they're upstairs in her bedroom, and one of the girls asks Eleanor and says, Eleanor, why are there 3 locks on the inside of your bedroom door? And Eleanor responds, to keep my uncles out. Yes. So again, nothing more is ever said about that, but that's perfectly understandable. We didn't start talking about that kind of stuff for about 10 years ago maybe, let alone back then. This is now 1900. But it's at the same time, and that's what I mean of this information coinciding here, where grandmother decides, let's send you to that school. So off she goes to England. And this is like wonderful. This is a beautiful time for her. Off she goes. The headmistress there is Mademoiselle Silvestre, a French woman, and this 1900, this French woman has the audacity to teach these girls how to think. I know. It's not just curtsy, not how to play the piano and how to speak French real cute. Nope. She has them come to the dinner table, and you all better be ready to have a political discussion, and don't you parrot to me some kind of politically appropriate response. She wants you to think and have your own answer. 1900, you're kidding. This is amazing. Eleanor's in love with this. And this woman, the headmistress, really gets it. She writes about Eleanor that she knew the nobleness of Eleanor's heart. And so, you know, Eleanor, as we would say, this is the 3 steps forward. And boy, is she moving forward now. And she's got friends. Nobody's shooting a gun over their heads either. This is fabulous. And her friends come to her and ask for advice about things, and they want to talk about boys or whatever. But Eleanor is, of course, a little bit wise for her age because of everything she's been through so far. So she's liking this. And she even says in her autobiography, to tell you how much this meant to her, she says in her autobiography, one of the proudest things of her life was she was picked for the girls' hockey team. That's like hilarious, yeah. You know? But if any of us have been in that situation where, yep, there you are, and you're in the gym class, and you're the last one picked, you know they didn't want you on your team, and now she's getting picked. So you can feel this growing in her. In fact, she has to go home one summer. All right, that makes sense, summer vacation and everything. But her grandmother then says, I'm sorry, you're not going back. You're not going back because I don't have a nanny to escort you. And all women didn't go anywhere back then without an escort. It's the one thing, say, in that Downton Abbey, I mean, and it's historically accurate in so many ways, but those daughters in that first season, they would have never gone anywhere without an escort. That girl would have never gotten in that car with that Irish driver. And the other daughter would have never gone to that farm. No way, not without an escort. So, there's Eleanor's problem, right? This is the first time I could find where she is going to stand up for herself. Now, she needs an escort, she needs a nanny to take her back. If she lived nowadays, she could have gone online and she could have Googled rentananny.com and she would have found somebody, right? Or gone on Craigslist. but she doesn't. She takes out an ad in the newspaper and she gets somebody. So now she goes to her grandmother and says, I'm going back. This is huge. So off she goes, and she's got another year there, and you know, enjoys it. She goes on trips with the head mistress. And it's fine. But the following summer, Eleanor is 17, and she's going to be 18 in October. And grandmother now says, you're staying home. You're not going back to school because the coming out season is in the fall for New York City, and you're a Roosevelt, and you're going to be there. So Eleanor, of course, is not pleased. She's really nervous about this. She's tall. You know, Eleanor is like 6 feet tall, and so she's gangly. She's not that falling into the mode of what women's supposed to be back then, or what was valued, of, you know, flirtatious and all fawn-eyed over men. I mean, she was Eleanor. But of course, she's trying to fit into this mold. And she doesn't. So here's the coming out season. There they voted Belle of the Ball. She doesn't make it. And of course she writes in her autobiography how she was ashamed of this because her mother had been Belle of the Ball, the aunts had been Belle of the Ball, her grandmother had been Belle of the Ball. She's not. And to make matters worse, her uncle, Teddy, is president. And so it's in all the society columns of all the papers. Oh, the niece of the president is having her coming out season. And you know what those newspapers said? And we all remember how beautiful her mother was. I know. And Eleanor read this. So you can imagine. She's volunteering at a community center, what are they called? Settlement house. Helping underprivileged people in New York City, after-school programs for kids and things like that. So she's doing this volunteer work, still having a sense of presence about her own self, so that's all good. There's some other women that are with her that, you know, they're going to be going on to college even, so these are her friends, so she's got a little bit of a network going on. But the problem is she's dating, and who is she dating? She's dating Franklin. Franklin is started courting her. So we're going to do a quick segue about Franklin, mostly just so that I can tell you about his mother. Who's a Franklin, his mother is Sarah Delano Roosevelt. Delano, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt. She is so proud of this last name. She'll say to Franklin as he's growing up, you're really a Delano, you're not a Roosevelt at all. As if Roosevelt's a name to sneeze at, right? Well, let me tell you why she's so proud of this name. And remember, I told you, society had a capital S back then. And in anything, there's a bell curve. And boy, she's at the peak of that bell curve. Why? Because she can walk her family lineage back to William the Conqueror. I know. Could anybody beat that? Not even the Vanderbilts who live next door can beat that. So she's queen. And she's very proud of it. Now, what she wouldn't want you to know is how did her family make all this money? We joke about the Kennedys and the whole bootlegging thing, right? No, this is nothing compared to. You look at the 1800s and you see families like the Cabots, the Lowes, the Delanos, the Roosevelts, any of those big old family names, and we think, wow, they made so much money. Yeah, you know how they made a lot of their fortune, or how it all got started? Was, I know, I always see a few people, is if you see it, and it's the shipping industry in the 1800s, it's not slavery. that was dying out by then. It was the opium trade to China. Let me tell you, Queen Victoria is the biggest drug dealer we'll ever know. Over 15% of her British Empire was funded by the opium trade, just as an FYI. So this is how Delano's made a lot of their money. In fact, Sarah at one point even takes a trip to China. That's what the Opium Wars were about. All right, so anyway, so there's Sarah, and Franklin now is her only child, and as I say, not just the world revolves around Franklin, the universe revolves around Franklin. This young boy can do no wrong. He does not take a bath by himself until he's 8 years old. Now, I'm a counselor. I would like to look at him and say, do you want to talk about that? You know, this is like, and think about this background. And all right, let me tell you about the father too, James, who's just the traditional country gentleman, wealthy, and he wants to raise Franklin to, you know, ride horses, run the estate, learn how to sail. They've got the great camp up in Campobello there, and that's where they learn to sail, and they go there every summer, like all societies. Families have their great camps. So he's also, of course, every day, every minute involved with their little boy. How different is this than what I've been telling you about Eleanor? I mean, we've got night and day. How well do you think this will all work together? So Franklin, in fact, even this business about the Vanderbilts and how the Roosevelts felt about themselves. The Vanderbilts, and if you go there, you can get a ticket for their house too, right? They send an invitation to the Roosevelts and say, would you like to come for dinner? Now, I can't imagine how you could out-snob the Vanderbilts, but James Roosevelt can, because he says to Sarah, his wife, he goes, oh, if we go to their house for dinner, we'll have to have them in return. You know, it's like, you're kidding. So this, again, is very high self-esteem, very assured, and they, of course, pass every ounce of that down to Franklin. So Franklin grows up, and he goes off to college, and he's in Harvard. And that is when his father dies. Sarah is so lonely. She gets an apartment up in Harvard, right across the street from Franklin. And by now, he's seeing Eleanor. And people have asked me sometimes, well, why did he go after Eleanor? Because Franklin's a tall, good-looking man, very charming and everything. Well, as they said in the Ken Burns series, you know, Franklin loves power. When he finished with Harvard and he's a lawyer down in New York City and they're all sitting around, all the lawyers, and saying, oh, what are you going to do when you're done with this job? What's Franklin say? Franklin says, I'm going to be president. And also, the other interesting dynamic is when he starts seeing Eleanor, one of the reasons is he'd just gotten dumped by a really good-looking, very assertive young woman who was his equal in society. Well, so he's on a rebound. Well, if you're on a rebound, you want somebody safe. And who could be more safe than Eleanor? And Eleanor has looked at this family of Franklin and the mother, Sarah, and decided, I'm going to make this work. And she's going to figure out a way that Sarah will learn to love her. Eleanor will be more successful having 38 countries agree on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights than she will of ever getting Sarah to love her. It's just not going to happen. And some of the best stories. I always say, you don't have to write fiction, you just have to read history. So anyway, Franklin's worried to tell his mom, oh, by the way, I'm seeing Eleanor, because he knows she's not going to be pleased. And he's right, she's not. So here's what Sarah says. This is the first of many stories. She says, all right, here's the deal. I'm going to get 3 first-class tickets for a cruise to the Caribbean. 1 ticket's for me, of course. 1 ticket is for you, Franklin. And 1 ticket is for whoever you want, as long as it's not Eleanor. And you know what? Here's the deal, though. Eleanor agrees to this. You know, she's not happy about it. But why doesn't she just, you know, look at Franklin here, I'll pick you, and say, all right, you just go right ahead, you go on that trip. And if you think I'm going to be here when you get back, you're nuts. Why can't she? She's a Roosevelt. She's got access to her own money now. She's volunteering at this settlement house. She's coming into her own. but she hasn't come far enough. Eleanor, by now, at this time still, is that little girl chewing on her fingers, just waiting and hoping to be asked in. She just still wants a family. She just still wants a mom. She just still wants somebody to love her. And she's just made this decision, I'm going to make this work. And boy, does she have tenacity. So anyway, they come back from a cruise. That clearly didn't work because Franklin and her are still seeing each other. And so now the next thing that Sarah says is, all right, then fine, let's keep your engagement secret for 1 year. And they do. And at the end of the year, then, yep, they're still going to get married. They get married March 17th. They have asked Teddy, who's president, to come and give Eleanor away, and he's delighted because this really was a favorite niece of his, because they do always have that goodness about them that they want to just do for society, and he's always seen that in Eleanor too. So it's going to be March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, because he's going to be in New York anyway to be a part of, he'll lead the St. Patrick's Day parade. And so the wedding needs to be either before or after the parade, please. And they, of course, accommodate that. What's funny is Sarah gives Eleanor a gift, of course. And again, Freud would have had a heyday with this. It's a dog collar necklace. I've had so many people say they didn't have a leash. So anyway, they're going to go on their honeymoon and they go to Europe. And Sarah tells them, listen, I'll set up your house for you. Everything will be ready for when you get back. And she keeps her word. And so when they get back, what they've got is, it's a townhouse that she's bought for them. And of course, a townhouse shares a wall. And again, I've had a lot of people say, I know, she's got a key. No. And then other people will say, oh, she's on the other side of the wall. And I said, no, it's even, yes, she's on the other side of the wall, but she doesn't need a key. Because she's had the carpenter come and put doorways on every floor between in that wall. So can you imagine? I mean, I have a mother-in-law I adored, but I wouldn't necessarily want every time I walk through my house, oh, she's there. Sarah will always be intrusive. And now, over these next few years, Eleanor in the next 11 years has 6 children. That's being pregnant for 54 months. That's exhausting. It's just exhausting. Every one of those babies is over 10 pounds. That's exhausting. One child dies at 8 months of just natural causes. So you have of the 5 children, the oldest is Anna, a daughter, and that's going to be important later on, and the remaining 4 are boys. And they all outlive the parents. There will be, among the 5, 17 divorces. All right, now, again, I'm not so sure how straight my head would be screwed on either if I had Sarah, my grandmother, who is this doting grandmother now, and Eleanor has said, you know, you've been bad this week, I'm taking away your pony. Grandma comes along and says, don't worry, I'll buy you another. Or one of the boys, James, he's gotten a speeding ticket, and he has to go before a judge. And the judge, of course, then he says, okay, you're fined $15. But then the judge says, do you want to come home for dinner? Listen, I've had a son go before a judge. That judge did not say, do you want to come home for dinner? But their father is a governor, their father is a president. They've always got these people clamoring to maybe be their friend. And how do you ever know if they're really wanting to be your friend or just trying to get to your mom or dad? You know, it would be very tough. So anyway, in those 11 years too, Sarah then, well, remember she said to Franklin, oh, you're really a Delano, you're not a Roosevelt? Well, now she's saying to those kids, her grandchildren, she's saying, you know, and this is a real quote, she's saying, you know, I'm your true mother. Eleanor only bore you. So again, I'm wanting you to understand, look at the undermining that's constantly going on. Franklin will never once turn to his mother and say, stop, just stop it. Because she holds the purse strings. And she will always hold the purse strings until she dies. And Franklin is always exceeding his allowance, and so how can he go and ask mommy for more money if he's then confronted her and said, stop treating Eleanor this way? You know, when that woman dies, there's those huge trees on the property up there of Hyde Park. You know, they're like 200-year-old trees, big fat ones like this. one of those trees. There's no rainstorm, there's no windstorm, there's nothing that day. The day that woman dies, one of those trees just goes thunk and falls over. I know. I mean, and I really verified that because I just think it's so weird. But no, it's true. It just fell right over. She was a powerful woman. They built a casket, I know it. So over these next, like I said, she's had the children during World War I. Now Franklin is Assistant Secretary to the Navy, and remember we talked about his love of power, and what he has done, of course, is, you know, one of the reasons he loved being with Eleanor then is, if he was going to be dating Eleanor got invited to Christmas parties at the White House. Well, where does Franklin get to go for a Christmas party at the White House? He gets to schmooze and network. And so he's building his bridges, and he follows that path of Teddy Roosevelt. They weren't the same political party, but boy, he saw the path and how to do it. One of the jobs Teddy Roosevelt had was Assistant Secretary to the Navy. So guess what Franklin is? He's Assistant Secretary to the Navy. It's World War I. They're living in Washington, D.C. Eleanor kind of it's a good time for Eleanor because a lot of the social rules are relaxed. Back then, you know, these women of her status, they would have to go out and give calling cards and greet people and have people over for tea. There was all kinds of just social rules and constraints that, boy, you had to live up to. So now with the war going on, that's relaxed, and Eleanor is enjoying the fact that she's a volunteer for the Red Cross. She's got her uniform, and she's down there handing out donuts and coffee to the boys as they're coming in and out of Washington, writing letters for them and everything, and that's when she starts knitting. She doesn't knit well, but she knits. And this is a good time for her. Now, to help her with the 5 children and then still some of the things she always has to take care of is she has a social secretary, and this woman is also her friend, and that's important. Her name's Lucy Mercer, and she's young and she's beautiful, and the kids just adore her. She's a bit of a nanny to the kids. You know, she's just full of fun. And everybody loves her, especially Franklin. And Eleanor's been worried about this for a few years because Franklin has always been, and right up to the day he dies, he's a womanizer. And of course back then, it was like, that's of course the way, it was just so accepted. He always loves to have his entourage of fawning females around him all the time, stroking his ego. And Lucy Mercer then becomes one of them, although Eleanor was used to the fact that she's got to put up with the flirtation and everything, but she didn't expect ever for this to be a full-blown affair. She finds a stack of letters, it's 1918, and realizes this is what's been going on. And she's, like I said, she's been nervous about it for a couple of years because remember the great camp up in Campobello, which is north of Maine? Franklin has always gone with them during the summertime. It's his family's camp. Well, now for the past couple summers, he said, listen, you go, you take the kids, I'll be up in a few weeks, I'm really busy in Washington. And Eleanor's worried about it. She's writing letters back to him, hey, how's everything going? You know? And so she's had this sickness in her stomach for the last few years, and now, of course, here's the evidence. So there's a big conversation between 3 people now once this, as we say, hits the fan. Eleanor's in on that conversation, Franklin's in on that conversation. Who else? Sarah. Eleanor says, all right, you can have a divorce. Sarah, though, says, you get a divorce, no money. She was not going to have a divorce in her family. Now, Franklin, what's he love? What's his motivator? Man, if we were lawyers, we would say, what's the motivation? Power. And if he wants power, if he wants to be president, you're not going to be president if you get a divorce. We didn't have a divorce president until Reagan. And you're not going to be, let alone you're not going to be president if you don't have money, and he needs his mom's money. And if he marries Lucy Mercer, he's definitely not going to be president because she's Catholic. And we didn't have a Catholic in the White House till Kennedy. My parents were married in the 50s. My mom was brought up Catholic, my dad was Protestant. My mom's parents did not go to that wedding, and this was the 50s. 1918 we're talking about, so there was no way he was ever going to go anywhere if he didn't say to Eleanor, oh, don't worry, I'll never see her again. Well, hopefully she didn't take that to the bank. So we'll do a quick segue on Lucy for just a minute and close that chapter. He does see her on and off through all the years. She's at every one of the inaugurations. via Secret Service car, visiting at the White House, and then when he has his house down in Warm Springs, she's a frequent guest there. So literally back in 1945, when Franklin is so ill, he's down in Warm Springs, and he had his house down there because of the polio, and that's where he was hoping to somehow cure or at least be better physically because of the Warm Springs. Lucy is there, and she's paid to have his painting done, a portrait of him, and that's when he dies. It's in March. And so they shuttle Lucy out of the picture right away, and Eleanor comes down the next day, and one of the cousins, remember the entourage that he would always have, well, a couple of those were his other cousins, and so one of them says, well, by the way, Lucy was here yesterday, and that's when he died. Now this is where, it's my opinion, I don't think by now we're talking about Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the woman. Nobody's going to make me feel inferior by now, all right? She's a woman in her own right. She's been through enough. It's my opinion, when she knew that about Lucy, I don't think she was surprised. I think if it had been now, she'd have gone, whatever. But what she didn't know, what did kick her in the teeth, was it was her daughter, Anna, that oldest daughter, that had been making the arrangements, that would know Eleanor's schedule and when Eleanor was going to be out of town, that Lucy could come and visit at the White House. This blew her just out of the water. Eleanor had been having her My Day column. That woman had a My Day column for 27 years, a daily column, 27 years, a following of 9 million people. Eleanor would have been all over Facebook, Twitter, a blog. She would have had followers. So here in her column, she would write about politics, or she'd write about her blueberry muffin recipe. Well, of course, she'd write about her kids. And one of the things she'd even said in her column was, oh, my daughter Anna and I are so close. There isn't anything that we don't share. And so you can imagine then to find out, wait, she's been betraying me all these years. And think about it whenever you see then any of those pictures of Eleanor when Franklin has died, and there she is in the veil. And there is a stony face there that is just staying stoic. And I don't think it was necessarily, just, okay, the inundation of this the publicity of all of this. It was her still trying to get over the fact what's happened within her personal life. And who can she tell? She can't tell anybody that. She's never gonna. So anyway, that's the Lucy Mercer thing. So now we're back to 1920 though. And over these next couple years, 1918, 19, 1920, these are very tough times for Eleanor. And what I don't like in a book, and even in my book, or any book, we talk about that, and within the turn of a page, you've now turned 3 years. Those are long years when, as we would say as writers, that's the dark night of your soul, and it's not just a night, it's 36 months. And you're really questioning yourself. You are asking yourself, who am I? Who am I going to be? Because she doesn't want to go back to being the good wife anymore because that didn't work. And she's not going to do that. But keep in mind, she doesn't have any examples of that are saying, like an Oprah Winfrey going, go girl. Who's encouraging her? Nobody. And she can't even go public with what happened. Everybody knows in Washington. This is like as public as the blue dress, right? But everybody knows, but nobody talks about it. And especially nobody's going to feel sorry for Eleanor because, she's homely. So how can we blame Franklin? That's the public opinion. So what are you going to do? Who are you going to be? How are you going to move out of this? She's suicidal. She struggles with anorexia. She struggles with depression. She wants to kill herself. She doesn't. She makes a choice, and this is her finest moment. She decides, I'm going to be me. I'm going to be Eleanor. And that's where nobody's going to make me feel inferior without my consent. And from there on, that's the 3 steps forward, and there will not be again 2 steps back. So during the 1920s, she gets involved with some women's groups. We've just gotten the right to vote and everything, and this is a glorious time for her because these women really admire her. They see, again, like the headmistress, the nobleness of Eleanor's heart and how she can be a public speaker, which really takes a lot of courage because Eleanor's got an awful speaking voice. It's very wavery and we would say fluty. But she just knows, I'm going to be a speaker, and she does. And then, of course, there comes the time when now they're going to be, he's going to be president. And Eleanor does not want to be First Lady. In fact, there were some letters where she's writing to some friends saying, oh, I don't want this. They find him and they rip him up because they're so afraid the press will find it, and that, of course, will destroy his chances, or at least, you know, not be helpful. But anyway, Eleanor takes that character and she just decides, well, if I'm going to be First Lady, I'm going to do it my way. And by God, she does. She gets in there and she'll even go to the elevator, and the man that's supposed to run it for her, she goes, no, I'll do it. And she goes, no, wait, I'm supposed to help you. No, click. And off she goes in the elevator by herself. And so some of the things that she's doing, we'll cover just like 3 areas. For women, she's advocates for, like during the war, that the stores should be open after 5 because of course all the women have jobs, and when are they supposed to shop? She advocates for childcare after school because otherwise we think latchkey kids are a thing of nowadays. No, it was a problem back then. We just don't hear about a lot of these social problems because we were so swept up with the war. There's a war going on, but you know, we've got an 8-year-old that doesn't know what to do after school, and who knows what kind of trouble he's getting in. That's hardly going to hit the headlines. Eleanor advocates for these things, and it's why then she'll take the heat for being called a socialist, because she's wanting these progressive things. Oh, she's going to destroy the family. They've trotted out that argument every time anybody tries to do something different. And it obviously didn't work because we still have families. Anyway, and some of the other things, she was the first person to ask women to the White House to stay overnight just because of who the woman was, not because of who the husband was. This is like amazing stuff. She decides, because Franklin has press conferences, right? Of course. The press conferences at that time are for men only. Eleanor says, okay, I'll have a press conference, and they're going to be for women only. This is brilliant. And look at the difference. Look at the arc of that journey. This is the little girl that was chewing on her fingers and too nervous to come in, and now she's going, okay, sure, I'll have a press conference, and they're going to be for women. And, you know, she knows how to do it. She's leveraging her position. She didn't want to be First Lady, but by God, are you going to make me First Lady? I'm going to do something with it. And the beauty of that, too, on many levels, aside from just that she would do this for women, is it saved a lot of women their jobs, because it's the Depression. And if somebody's going to get fired, it's going to be the women get fired first, not the men. But these newspapers, they don't want to fire these journalists that are supposed to cover Eleanor's conferences, because by now Eleanor's got a reputation of saying, heaven knows what she's going to say, and we need to make sure we've got somebody there to get the story too, otherwise we're going to get scooped. One of the other areas that she, Kathy, what time do we have and how much more time do we have?
It's 10 minutes of 8.
10 of 8, all right. 10 minutes? All right, one of the other big categories that Eleanor went after, of course, was the rights of blacks. And I need to put this in context for you as to why this was so amazing. It's not like nowadays, or since the Civil Rights Movement, let's say, where you've got a certain number of white people that they'll go and advocate for the rights of African Americans. Back then, that did not happen. The very first example of somebody stepping outside the boundary of their own self, or the category of people, was Wilberforce back in England when he started advocating for let's not have slaves. Otherwise, it's like, that's a black problem, it's not my problem. You know, why should I have to do anything about it? But think about it. What's more powerful to me if we as women are saying, oh, about women's rights? I'm sorry, no. It's much more powerful to me when I see a man advocating for it. It's not about women's rights, it's human rights. So anyway, Eleanor gets it in her head, she's going to do something about this. And this is what she's going after, the context. From 1880 to 1930, that's a 50-year time frame. In our country, there were over 5,000 lynchings. Now those are just ones we know about. These aren't people that disappeared in a swamp one night that we didn't ever get the name. And that's horrible, right? I live in Paoli, and these were huge public, gruesome affairs. We did not just take these people out and shoot them. No, they were tortured and then finally hung. If there had been a lynching in Paoli, the R5 goes through Paoli, they would have added more train cars, more, so that we can get everybody that wants to come and see this out to Paoli. None of these, I'm not exaggerating anything. I'm not making any of this up. This is the way it was. Now, here's the point in all of this, as if that's not bad enough, 5,000 murders. That's over 5 people, 5 or 8. a month for 50 years. Here's the real problem with all that. We as a society, not one person was convicted of murder. Not one. So there's the smoking gun for who we were as a society. Our blinders were so thick. We did not want to talk about this. We were not going to acknowledge it. Nope, nope, nope. And so now you can imagine we've got Eleanor coming along, and she's going to visit these people. Oh, wait. You're ruffling our feathers. You're taking off our blinders. We liked our blinders. Thank you very much. We've been keeping up just fine. We've ignored 5,000 murders. So here are some of the things that are just terrific Eleanor stories. One of the things she does, she goes down to a conference in Alabama. It's the 30s, and segregation is the law. And you've got the sheriff, Bull Connor, who's running around making sure you've got the black sitting on one side and the white sitting on the other side, right? It's the law. This same sheriff is the one who goes on to arrest Martin Luther King Jr., by the way. And I'd love to have had like a YouTube video of him trying to do this, make sure. Eleanor is going to this conference, and she walks in, and you can just imagine, she's like, She doesn't want to sit on the side of the blacks because she'll get parted off. She doesn't want to sit on the side of the whites because that's condoning the law. She takes her chair, and she sits in the aisle. That's brilliant. And that's why I love to give this talk to kids in high schools and colleges and everything, to help them see these creative ways to still make a point. You know, we've just gone through the whole Baltimore and the bricks and everything, and there's injustice, yes, but find this way, find a way to give voice and to make people still see. Look at Eleanor was making us see. These stories were going viral. She's making headlines. Franklin is getting letters in the mail saying, "Do you know what your wife is doing?" The woman that edited the Eleanor book, she was laughing on the phone one time, and I said, "What's so funny?" And she said, "You know, my father, that was a contemporary of Eleanor's time." She says, "I remember my father saying about Eleanor, 'Why can't that woman just stay home?'" So she's just ruffling our feathers. She's agitating the status quo. And so a couple of the other things that she does, she goes to a conference in Detroit. And here, let me see the photo. I'm just thinking. She goes to a conference in Detroit, and I remember seeing the headlines about this, something like, "Eleanor does it again." And I remember thinking, oh heavens, what has she done now? Did she hold hands with a black man? Did she kiss him on the cheek, dance with somebody? What did she do? What's this photo that was so sensational? This is the photo. A photo of her, I'll just explain. It's a photo of her leaning over and accepting something from a little child. The child's black. And we as a country, we're going nuts about this. Just nuts. So if you see below it, here's another photo. That's of a stamp. It's 1984, a 32-cent stamp. And we made that stamp to commemorate that photo. To commemorate how far we've come, to acknowledge, yeah, we were kind of stupid. One other thing that she did is she goes down to visit the Tuskegee Airmen. And the reason this is important is because she has learned if I show up, that shows support, right? And we don't think that's important. That's leverage again. Remember the march they had in France back in February? And that's why it was so important. Who shows up for that? Netanyahu is there. It's sending a message. It's important because it's support for the cause. Who didn't show up? I don't care whether we agreed whether he should have or not. The fact that Barack Obama, our president, didn't show up was a message. Whether he should have been there, I don't care. It's a message. So Eleanor knows you show up because of who she is. I mean, it's nothing if I show up someplace, but good grief, if somebody important shows up, that's a message, right? So now she's First Lady. She's going down there to visit the Tuskegee Airmen. And of course, we've always for years said, "Oh, I'm sorry, they're not smart enough to fly an airplane. They can only shine our shoes and serve tables in the Navy," kind of thing. We've got the war going on. So now we finally said, yes, okay, we'll let them fly. Eleanor goes down there to give them and show this support, and she's making it a photo op the whole time. So she's sitting in this meeting and everything, and there's a white guy that's in charge. And he gives the briefing. And then Eleanor goes, oh, okay, well, you know, I'd like to go up for a bike ride. The guy in charge, he goes, okay, here, we're going to send Joe up. And Joe's a white guy. And Eleanor goes, no, I want that one. It's a black guy. So there's all those pictures of Eleanor sitting in the back seat of an airplane waiting with a black man flying her. It's like, no, you don't go. And the reason she did that is because it's in the newspapers and it's on the kitchen table of our eating breakfast, and it's forcing us to talk about it. It's making us talk about it because that's what she knew would make change. And she was right, it did. Because if we can ignore it still, it's not going to change. So one of the other things she did too was just the Marian Anderson case. And let me explain, because sometimes it's a little misunderstood. They weren't upset that she was going to come and sing at their building. Heavens knows we would let black people entertain us. That was not the deal. The problem was it was going to be an integrated audience. That's what the DAR was upset about, and it's their building. So they said, no, you're not having Marian Anderson come sing. Eleanor is a member of the DAR. So several things happen. One, it actually becomes quite good. Google it when you get home. There's a beautiful YouTube video of now Marian Anderson singing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with Abraham Lincoln behind her. There's 75,000 people in front of her. Marian, let me tell you, was scared. She was possibly going to get shot that day. But you can imagine just in all this grace and dignity and to sing America the Beautiful when I just wasn't allowed to sing in this other building. But she does it. Here's the other point about this. Eleanor then quits the DAR, and she does it publicly. Remember the My Day column? So she uses that. She writes in her My Day column, I cannot be a part of any organization that this is their policy. Now, you might think, you know, well, that's just grandstanding or something. I would differ, because it did make a difference. I've been giving this talk for a couple years, and I've had at least 10 people come up to me and explain to me how they saw their mother or their parents, this happened during their parents' time, and the difference it made in their lives. One woman said to me, you know, my mother realized, my gosh, she belongs to an organization in New York City that didn't allow Jews. And she was like, well, that's not right then. And so, like, you see, it just kind of shakes us up and it wakes us up sometimes, because sometimes we're not really meaning to be mean. We're just shallow or we're ignorant or whatever. But Eleanor would just go, no, let's wake up here. And I've had other people come and say, you know, my aunts were all going to join the DAR. They had all their paperwork ready. But, you know, when they saw that and they realized it, they didn't. So this is the effect of Eleanor. So one of the other things then, too, is her work and her support for our veterans during World War II, and we're going to close with this. She went on 3 trips to the Pacific to go and visit the troops. And these were not photo op occasions. They were in cargo planes because the press was having such a fit about, oh, you're losing gas money. Eleanor paid for a lot of the gas on 2 of those trips. She didn't even have an assistant go with her. She's dressed in her Red Cross uniform just to keep it simple. Doesn't matter, she's the First Lady. On 1 trip alone, she made 23 stops. I don't even like 1 layover. She made 23 stops to islands that nobody else went to. And in fact, I gave this talk at a retirement community one time. A guy in the back, I could see this was affecting him. He had tears running down his face. And he raised his hand and I said, yes, sir. And he said, I was one of those stops. She came to our island when nobody else did. And again, I come and give a 45-minute talk on what I would call the trickle down of the Eleanor effect still. That all of these stories and how they have affected people still to this day, that people will come up to me afterwards and say, how it changed something in their family, how it woke them up. The beauty of her is she goes on to become this world-renowned person. She truly has been dubbed First Lady of the World. We don't necessarily acknowledge it because she's one of our own, but the rest of the world did. One organization called her, she's more iconic than Niagara Falls of America. but she's always able to keep this beautiful balance of this grace and dignity on a world scale, but still very personal. So we'll close with this one story. If you ever have a chance to go up to Hyde Park, well worth it. There's the big house where Franklin was born and everything, but then there's Valkill. That's her house. That was built in the 20s where she lived. And all very black and white photos all through the house, nothing pretentious or anything like that. And you go to her desk, and on her desk is a nameplate, and it's just a simple nameplate. And it's spelled E-L-A-N-O-R. The first time I saw that, I thought, oh gosh, I misspelled her name. How could I, and I just sent the book off to be printed. So I asked the park ranger, I said, what's the deal with her nameplate there? And he goes, oh, great story. Eleanor would always have these kids come field trips, from high school and all that, and she'd show them around the house and take them over to Springwood. Well, this one was a boys group, and they went back, and of course all boys had shop class, girls had home ec, didn't we? And so the kid went back and he decided, I'm going to make Eleanor a nameplate. And I used to teach, and you can just imagine Eleanor, E-L-A-N-O-R. That's how he makes her. That's what's on her desk still. And in front of that desk stood Tito, stood Khrushchev, stood John F. Kennedy. And what's the message from just that nameplate? The humility and humbleness that, this was a gift to me. Thank you very much. So those are my Eleanor stories. Thank you. I'm in no hurry if people have questions. I'm happy to stay or you want to book afterwards or anything. But I realize everybody, might have work tomorrow. Yes.
I read a book about Alice Longworth years ago.
Yes.
And she did not like Eleanor.
Nope.
She used to make great fun of her and Franklin. They were opposite political. But I think she was also Alice was jealous of.
Alice's father is Teddy. Alice was a real snit. You would not want to get on her bad side. Well, I can think of other words for it, but we won't use that. So yes, remember this whole Lucy Mercer thing? So Eleanor's out of town because she's up at Campobello. Oh, Alice is having a dinner at the White House. Oh, Franklin, come. Oh, Eleanor's not here. She can't come with you. Bring Lucy. She knew exactly what she was doing. Yeah. She didn't. Yeah, she was very jealous of Eleanor because Eleanor had a good heart. Yeah. Yes.
What kind of mother was she?
This is a good question. Then it was very difficult because there was so many rules about how to raise a child and everything. This was back during some of those days where, don't let them cry, or you let them cry, and things like that. And then of course you've got the mother-in-law that then is constantly overriding her. So she wasn't a very good mother. But the beauty of her is she totally admits that. Now, as her kids grew up and once Franklin died, she did have a good relationship, and her relationship with Anna did heal. It took a few years, but she was always there to support them. But at some point, when she kept being undermined when they were still growing up, she kind of just said, well, she kind of went off and did her own thing because this was a no-win scenario here. Yeah. Anybody else?
Wasn't it her grandmother that put her in some kind of a corset or some kind of device to straighten up her posture or something?
Eleanor, not really. That might have been Bambi. Teddy's sister had trouble actually with a curved spine. I know that for sure. Eleanor, for any of those poor women, my God, they had corsets, they had things, they walked with even sticks behind their shoulders to make sure they always kept their chin. Oh, they had thistle underneath their chin so that they never dropped their chin. Had to die. Yeah. So, exactly. Yes.
I knew Eleanor Roosevelt personally. I can't say her quite a while, but up there. She was a lovely woman.
Which one?
Oh,
Paul.
yeah.
Yes. Oh, I think he probably was.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
He and my uncle were in business and they was just a fun thing.
Yep. Yep. I'm sure he was, and this is where I mean when I say yes. But alcoholism is a disease, and it's so horrible that back then they didn't really handle it as well as they should, and then it caused problems for everybody. Yeah. But he was a fine person in many ways. Yeah.
He had Lily's.
Yep. I know, I can't really speak for sure. I know a couple of them struggled, or certainly had their issues. But I'm not really, I can't say for sure that any of them were what we would say diagnosed with alcoholism.
When she was going through that tough time, you said it was like there's 3 years, and you said she really had no one to talk to. I was curious, like, when was she didn't get back into you, or did she? You know what I mean? If she got the strength from that head mistress and learned so much from her, that you didn't get back and meet with people she
Yeah.
studied with or teachers.
I think she didn't want to leave the kids, and she didn't want to make that break. I just think she really had realized at some very deep level she needed to figure this out herself. And aren't we glad she did? Yeah. So, all right then, well, thank you very much for having me. It's been my pleasure.